So, if you clicked on this video, I'm assuming you're probably a little too familiar with this screen, or at least more than you'd like to be. Contrary to what some people may say, this game is extremely difficult, especially for new players and people like me who play, I don't know, a little more casual games, I guess. So I wanted to make this video just so you had some actionable tips to hopefully prevent some future deaths. So if that's something you're interested in, let's jump into it. So the first tip I guess I want to offer you may seem kind of obvious, but it's timing. This goes the same for whether you're fighting a boss or large ad groups. You just really need to watch out for those heavy attacks, and some of them are really weirdly timed. Sometimes it seems like they're winding up and they're going to release immediately, but then they don't, and it fakes you out and you land and end up dying instantaneously. But dying a few times to those mechanics is fine. That way you learn certain enemy mechanics as you go later on in the game, because where you want to avoid dying is once you get to the end game where you map, because each time you die you lose experience. So die all you want, learn as much as you can about each enemy and boss as they pop back up in the maps later, but do it before then so that you're ready to move on and die less later. The next piece of advice I could offer is a strange one, but target prioritization. So as you progress through the game, certain enemies become glaringly obvious that they're the most dangerous. Especially these little bastards. It's important to focus on the targets that can easily incapacitate you. So targets that have the stuns modifier, or targets that can freeze you, like these bastards, or targets that can hinder you. Focusing on these enemies has saved me from a few deaths, especially in the end game where there's a million enemies on the screen and I'm not really sure why I'm going slower, but maybe there's a hinder aura or something like that. But it's important to focus on those targets because the slower you go, it seems like, the more likely you are to die. I've never seen a game where movement speed is like probably one of the more important stats. It's always been nice to have, but not necessary, and in this game it feels like the faster you're able to go, the less likely you are to die. So getting rid of these particular enemies that are able to stop you from moving entirely or slow you down are going to be your priority. Take them out first if possible, and then focus on everybody else. I know that's usually easier said than done, but I found this to be a extremely helpful strategy, at least from my personal experience so far. Another piece of advice I can offer you is given by none other than my good friend Patches O'Houlihan.
Remember the 5 D's of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
But in all seriousness, legitimately, dodging frequently can save your life in this game. However, it's important to time the dodges. That's a big part of it. Dodging randomly and burning the dodge can sometimes really get you killed, and it'll sometimes roll you right into the attack, which I've totally not done before. But if you dodge too soon and you're not ready, you won't be able to move out of the way in time. Or if you dodge too soon or use a dodge against particular attacks, like the Act 3 final boss Doriani, the lightning jazz fingers he does, that legitimately will cause you to take damage if you dodge instead of just running from it, because you can't recover fast enough to avoid the electricity. So it's really important that while dodge is a good mechanic, it's also really important that you know that you need to time them properly. So I mentioned this in my previous video as something that I learned pretty quickly, but you need to focus on your defensive stats as well. This is something that it's very easy to neglect because you're so hyper focused on getting your damage numbers up to do more damage to bosses or whatever. But you can't neglect evasion, energy shield, or armor when they decide to finally fix it. These passives are massively important to keeping you alive. And there are all kinds of key passives in the tree that do crazy things for your evasion that give you other benefits. So I know at least in the Monk Ascendancy for Invoker, one of the choices allows you to take your evasion and energy shield and add those together to grant you extra spirit, which gives you the opportunity to add in more of those defensive spirit gems like Ghost Dancer or Windwalker or any of those that kind of help out in those defensive type situations. but the tree is littered with extra energy shield regen or max, or extra armor, or extra evasion and movement speed. It's all over the place. So as you're planning out your builds in those passive trees, take a moment to enter in those defensive stats because they're going to help you stay alive way more than you think. And finally, this is a little counterintuitive to the point I just made, but sometimes the best defense is a really good offense. So damage output does help. If the enemies are dead, you have way less defensive decisions to be made. Find those skills like the Herald skills that put out some large AoEs that chain or freeze and clear entire packs of enemies super quickly. And utilize cold or hinders to give you a minute to think as well. Having those high output damage numbers is really important to eliminate bosses quickly as well, because the more you can avoid doing the same mechanics over that can be honestly super punishing, the better off you're going to be. This is especially true for things like trials or more difficult content, where if you get hit, it greatly matters in that moment. I am in no way a build expert at this game, not even close yet, so look up a build that maybe mixes the last two hints together, where there's a good mix of defensive stats and a good mix of offensive stats. Or if you just want to enjoy the game and not play as efficiently as possible all the time, take a look at that tree really in depth and see where you want to go, and then plan out how you can accomplish a build that does both of these well. So hopefully now you're on your way to becoming a little less familiar with dying. I wanted to keep this one pretty short and sweet because there's only so much you can talk about when it comes to dying in this game. But if you've got some other tips that you'd like to share, or you'd love to just share with us your greatest death story of all as you were learning, feel free to go ahead and do so in the comments below. Thanks for hanging out and watching. That's all I've really got for today, and I'll see you in the next one.